Jazakumullah khair, everyone, for coming out again. We're going to continue our reading of Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi's Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, and we're still in the chapter of Riyadat al-Nafs, the exercise of the soul, purifying our hearts and striving to make ourselves, our character and our disposition better and more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This chapter, we're going to go over the desires of our nufus, of our lower selves, or desires in general, and the signs of good character, but then also cultivating our children. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفع الله في علوم الدارين. He says, well, he's already talked about this, and we've gone over this a little bit previously, that the desires that we have, or this, more specifically the desires of our souls, are not placed in us except for a benefit. We weren't given the things that we like or that we want haphazardly. They were there for a reason. If we didn't have the desire to eat, then we wouldn't eat. We wouldn't have an appetite, wouldn't have a desire to eat, we wouldn't eat. If we didn't have the desires for intimacy, then we wouldn't have progeny. If we didn't have all of these things, they're there for a reason. But the point of what we're supposed to be striving to do, as we mentioned before, is to find balance. The goal is that how in which we use these is not to excessiveness in one way or the other. We're not overly indulging, nor are we overly neglecting. And so that is what it is that the job of this is supposed to be. And he mentions an example, or we could give an example very similar to losing weight. If your goal is to lose weight, then the only thing that you can do is to withhold caloric intake, eat less. That is the only way. You can work out all you want, but if your diet is no good, then you're not going to lose weight. And the same thing if you want to gain weight, you want to work out, the guys are hitting the gym, the only way that you're going to do it, if you have enough calories so that you will gain weight, muscle mass, etc. The same thing applies to every other aspect of ourselves. If there are qualities that we don't want, then the only way that we can reduce our input, the only way that we can reduce the amount that we engage in that thing, is to lessen the amount that we do it. And because we're leaning toward one extreme or the other, starting off with, in the beginning it's going to be very difficult, just like our weight loss journey. In the beginning, it's really difficult, and it's going to be very hard. Our stomachs are going to hurt. It's going to be something that we don't like, and it's going to feel very extreme. You're used to eating, 5,000 calories a day, and now you cut it in half, 2,500 calories. It will feel very hard. Over time, you'll get used to this new style of eating, and perhaps you'll even learn what works best for you. And so when we're thinking about curbing our desires or curbing things that we don't like that we're doing, or most importantly are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the beginning when we start this journey, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be incredibly hard. And it's going to require that we sacrifice and we work against ourselves. The goal is not to remove it in totality, but that we start to get it to where we can find i'tidal, a balance between the two. Now, Ibn Qudama then talks about and transitions into the signs of good character. And he starts off by saying that perhaps someone, a seeker, or someone who is trying to be a good person, thinks that because they've left off sins and things that are transgressions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then now they don't have to work anymore. They have corrected their character and they're all set. And so now istaghna an al-mujahada. They don't have to work and strive against themselves anymore. He said that's not the reality. The reality is this process of rectifying ourselves and this spiritual journey that we're on is an endless journey that the believer is always engaging in. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. He mentions the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the believers are the ones that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned, that their hearts tremble. And then when the verses are mentioned, they're increased in iman. The goal isn't that we hit this stagnant place and then we're all set, check. But they were constantly reflecting on the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ حَقًّا. Those that uphold their prayers and they give from that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for them, and those the ones that are true believers. Again, we're constantly striving. How often are we praying and we're thinking about something completely different? How often are we praying and we're distracted by whether it's what it is that we're going to do with our lives, whether it's something that just happened or we want to do later. Perhaps the person next to us is reciting out loud and it's really annoying, and now we're distracted thinking about, I wish he would just lower his voice. It's me and Aisha, sorry. And these are things that are going through our heads. When the reality is that we're in a place where we're supposed to be focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you want to walk past? You're more than welcome to. Miskina, she's waiting for like 2 minutes. Allah bless her. So what we're supposed to be doing is constantly working and striving to rectify and better ourselves. And that these verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that, he mentions another verse. تائبون عابدون حامدون سائحون راكعون ساجدون آمرون بالمعروف وناهون عن المنكر والحافظون لحدود الله وبشر المؤمنين. These are different characteristics, adjectives that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the believers. Those that are constantly repenting, those that are worshiping, those that are praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those that are fasting, those that are, and it's in the verbal noun. They're consistently doing these things. Fasting and prostrating and bowing and commanding what's good and forbidding what is evil and upholding the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and glad tidings to the believers. So it's not, again, a stagnant thing. This constantly working at ourselves is not something that we can do. We hit the switch and alhamdulillah, now we're believers and we're all set. But rather the reality is the believer is constantly working, constantly striving to better themselves. And the reality is the more that we learn about ourselves, the more that we recognize that we need to improve. It doesn't stop. SubhanAllah, one of my teachers called me a few weeks ago and he was reflecting on something that happened, an interaction he had. And he wasn't reflecting as if he did something bad, but how can he improve his interactions? This is one of my teachers. And so the question is, how do we continue to strive? How are we continuously working on trying to make ourselves better? In Khudama, he continues when I mentioned the Prophet ﷺ described the believers with many different characteristics. And he said we've explained some of those in the past. But when we're now on this journey of striving to better ourselves and striving to improve, then we should get to a place where we now start to want for our brothers and our sisters that we want for ourselves. We get to a level of altruism, ithar, where now we are feeling and trying to work on ourselves. Imam Ghazali mentioned that the level, and Ibn Khudama probably does too, but friends are 3 different categories. Those that, for the first level, the lowest level, is that we're opportunistic in our relationships. I'm only having a relationship with you so that I can take what I need from this situation. And that's the worst level of friend. The second level, a little bit higher that, is a relationship that's mutually beneficial. We're friends because I scratch your back and you scratch mine. The highest level is the level in which I'm serving you for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of generosity and altruism. I'm not doing it because I benefit from it. I'm doing it because it's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what we're supposed to be striving to do. As the Prophet ﷺ said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِي لَا يُؤْمِنُ عَبْدًا حَتَّى يُحِبُّ لِأَخِيهِ مَا يُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِهِ. He swore, the Prophet ﷺ said, by the one who owns and holds my soul. No believer truly believes until they love for their brother that which they love for themselves. Again, we're talking about what are the signs of good character. It should be that we care and think about our brothers and sisters just as we think about ourselves. To take a step back in the context of good character, how often do we come to classes like this and we get to meet people outside of our social circle? How can I care about you? How can I know what your needs are if I haven't even taken a second to ask you what your name is? You don't just find people opening up and being able to, you can't take care of anyone's needs, and your needs cannot be taken care of unless you have a relationship. And so as always, I'm just challenging us to continually strive to get to know our brothers and sisters. Because perhaps, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that to make someone smile or to smile at our brother or sister is a sadaqah. And idkhal surur fi wajh في قلب أخي is also a sadaqah, to make your brother or sister happy. Imagine how many of us in this room, don't raise your hands, feel lonely. How many of us come to these places simply, the lecture is icing on the cake. It's nice, but really we come because we want to be around people. We want to be in the sanctuary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's house. So imagine now that our brother or sister took the time to get to know us, ask how our day was. How does that make us feel when we leave? For this level of ithar is another level. This level of really caring for our brothers and sisters, altruism, comes later on. And the problem that we have is that we're not taking that first step. May Allah make us good brothers and sisters. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليكرم ضيفه، ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا يؤذي جاره، ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت." Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever believes in Allah in the last day, then let him be generous to his guest. Whoever believes in Allah in the next day, then let him or her not harm their neighbor. And whoever believes in Allah in the last day, speak good or remain silent." What we're talking about here is good character. In this context of good character is all about how it is that we are with other people. And so let's think about even those three things. Generosity to one's neighbor. How does that make us feel? How does that improve our relationships? How will that then trickle down into community and then society as a whole? If you know, without takalluf, without exaggerativeness, without feeling burdened by anything, simply that when you go over Fulan's house, they're going to treat you well, they're going to eat well. And so now when you think about this person, it's like, man, the last time his mom made the magluba, it was really nice. They made this, it was really good. Or they gave me a big portion, I took some home. Next time you have people over your house, buy the little to-go trays. They sell them at the grocery store now. The black bottom, clear top, and just give them extra food. So that when they leave your house, they're going to be making dua for you the next day when they're eating lunch. Small things that we can just be thoughtful about that make someone feel a little bit better. The next thing was, la yu'dhi jara. You don't harm your neighbor. The neighbors have a right on us, so much so that Sahaba thought that they were going to inherit. But because many of us live in the suburban reality, what about our brothers and sisters in community? That we don't harm them. Can we be introspective and reflective over our character and our actions and think about how it is that we've harmed our brothers and sisters? Simply by parking too close to the masjid, cutting people off in the parking lot, not being considerate. Now you took up 2 spots and someone couldn't pray Jumu'ah. Wallah al-Azim, I still think about that dude I made fun of and he left and never came back to I've never seen him since. May Allah forgive me. I shouldn't have made fun of him. He left and now khalas, he never came back. So we have to be considerate of our neighbors, but also our brothers and sisters that we are frequently interacting with. And the last one perhaps is the most difficult for us. فَلْيَكُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Speak good or remain silent. How much do we engage in backbite and in slander? How much do we engage in gossip for the sake of gossip? How much are we engaged in things that have zero benefit? May Allah forgive us. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said another hadith, أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا أحسنهم أخلاقا. That the most complete, the most perfect of believers in their faith is the one who has the best character. The Prophet ﷺ directly connected our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our character and how we interact with others. And as I was reminded of an athar, من عرف نفسه عرف ربه. Whoever knows themselves knows their Lord. If by us knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and our own deficiencies, that we know the things we need to work on. And by us being mindful of how we interact with others and doing it from a state of intentionality, doing it with an intention that we're going to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. We're serving this person because they are a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just because reciprocity. It's not just because of, I like being with them in community. It's because this person is a believer from the Ummah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This person is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I'm going to try my best to consistently do well. And I believe I mentioned here before, but I think for a lot of us, the challenge is that we've actually never seen good character. The status quo, the norm for us in America, is almost like bad behavior. I remember when I was in Boston, no shame on the Bostonians if they're any here, but I knew you weren't from Boston if you got over and thanked me. I was like, oh, this person ain't from Boston. If someone got over, you let them in the parking spot and they said thank you, I was like, they're not from Boston. Checked the plate every time without fail. 5 years in Boston, they weren't from Boston. Because the character was so hustle and bustle. The norm was so hustle and bustle, they didn't even say thank you to each other. So if that is all we've been exposed to, then that doesn't give us an excuse. That means that we have to challenge ourselves. Imagine what it is that you would like for people to do to you, even if you haven't had it. That doesn't mean that you're a pushover. That doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean you allow yourself to be taken advantage of. But you imagine what it is that you would like to see. And then you strive little by little to change and impact and input those things into yourself so that we can be that change. So that perhaps someone sees us and they're like, subhanAllah, that person was very welcoming. SubhanAllah, that person was very generous. SubhanAllah, that person generous with their time and their wealth. SubhanAllah, that one was very kind, etc., etc., etc. Allahumma salli Muhammad. From good character, Ibn Khudama mentions, is being patient with difficulty, or being harmed, excuse me. Withstanding, being forbearant with harm. The nature of community is that you are going to be harmed at times. The nature of human interactions is that it's not always going to be sweet. And us trying to be patient with their difficulties or the harm that is caused from community is a form of ibadah. فاحتمال الأذى is something that we really need to be mindful of. There's a narration that comes in the Sahihain that a Bedouin came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and grabbed hold of his cloak that he was wearing, so much so that it ripped it and then it came tight around his neck ﷺ. And he said, Ya Muhammad, oh Muhammad, tell them to give me some of the money that you have. So, okay, how many levels of rudeness can we extrapolate from this? First, he stepped on the cloak of the Prophet ﷺ. How did you get close enough? That's the question. Then he harmed him by it got tight around his neck. ﷺ. Then he spoke to him Ya Muhammad, very disrespectfully. And then he commanded the Prophet, tell them. For the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ laughed and gave him what he asked for. And then he said, Allahumma ghfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. He said, oh Allah, forgive. Whenever he was harmed, he would say, oh Allah, forgive my people, for verily they don't know. He made husn al-dhan, he made dua for them, and he said they don't know. I think that we really just have to be mindful of what our mindset is when we're bearing difficulties, when we're dealing with these type of things. It's not simply dealing with it and now it's on our hearts and now we're angry and now we're mad at this person, but striving to have husn al-dhan, to have good thoughts about our brothers and sisters. But then as we see from the adab of the Prophet ﷺ, and he mentions a couple of narrations of the Sahaba and those that came after them, that they would even make dua for them. So it says that Ibrahim al-Adham, which I believe is one of the tabi'een, he came by some Bedouins and a Bedouin army, and one of the soldiers said, where's Imran? His name is Ibrahim. And so he then pointed to a grave. You asked about Imran, Imran's dead right now. So that person hit him upside his head until he was wounded. And then they told him, do you know that was Ibrahim? That was a scholar. That, you know who you just were talking to, who just hit? And so then when that happened, he said that when he hit me in my head, I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him Jannah. He says, because when he hit me, I got rewarded for it, but I didn't also want him, I got rewarded and get the goodness of it, but I didn't want him from this interaction to get bad. He got hit upside his head unjustly for no reason. And he was wounded from it. But he made dua for the person so that they would be forgiven, so that they would get something good out of this interaction. How often are we thinking about our brothers and sisters in that same way? And wallahi, I fall short in this. The brother was praying next to me in Aisha, and I kept hearing every word he was saying. I was like, bro, I'm just trying to pray Aisha. You're disturbing my khushu' right now. I should have been making dua for him. Better yet, I should have focused on my own prayer. May Allah forgive us. So again, what we're trying to do is it's riyada. It's exercise. And like exercise, it's not something you can do once. No one prepares for a marathon by going running once. No one prepares for an Ironman or for, any type of physical training and thinking go to the gym once. It's slow, gradual work that we're trying to do and trying to build up. And when we recognize that we have deficiencies in some parts, we try to add there. And if we're going to excessiveness in others, we try to stop there. The last thing that we'll mention, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is he mentions cultivating our children. And I'm just going to skim over it. But he mentions that our children, and okay, while many of us here don't have children, I think it's important that we recognize why he's talking about this, because it shows the level of intentionality, but also the spiritual reality that we're dealing with. And he says that we have to recognize that our children are amana for the parents. And I would argue that it's even for us as a community as well. And their hearts are like treasures, pure treasures. And they become affected by anything that comes in contact with them. And so we need to be thoughtful and mindful about how it is. And so he says that when they're first born, then we make sure that they're not breastfed. They're not given any milk except from a righteous woman. How many of us are thinking about what type of milk or who is breastfeeding our kids? First of all, we don't allow people to breastfeed our kids because we're like weirdos. But then thoughtful about what they're consuming from the time they're born. So making sure that is who they're doing it. He says, فَإِنَّ اللَّبَنَ الْحَاصِلْ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ لَا بَرَكَ فِيهِ. Because milk that is taken from an impermissible place has no barakah. So the reason why we're considerate of these things is because as Muslims we believe in the ghaib. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe the muttaqeen? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Those that believe in the unseen realm. And in that unseen realm is the concept of barakah. Unfortunately, as a community, we only think about hasad and jinn, but can we just think about barakah a little bit? And so the reason why Ibn Khudama is here now saying that we need to be thoughtful of who the person is and be really cognizant of who is feeding our children, what they're eating, because we want them to have barakah from day one. Really, it starts before that, but because I'm trying to be respectful, we won't start there. The next thing is that, okay, now they're starting to get older, then they're taught how to eat. They start to get older. You teach them the adab of eating, that they don't eat too much, and they should eat from certain animals. They shouldn't eat like an animal. And they should wear good clothing. We start to teach them from a very young age how they should conduct themselves. And when another point that he mentions that I think is really, really beautiful, he said, when we see good character from children, we should praise them. When we see good character from children, we should praise them. How much of our community, when we're thinking of how we were raised, may Allah forgive our parents, do we only focus on negative? It's almost like the good character is an expectation and the bad character is what needs to be beaten out of us. But Ibn Khudama is mentioning that when we see from our adab and how we teach in our children is that we reward them for good character. Tayyib, we don't have children, we're in a community setting. What happens when we see a little kid praying in the masjid? I just saw a YouTube, Instagram meme of a sheikh. A little boy was talking in salah and he went in his bag and took out a piece of oud. Literally bukhur. Now I don't know why I gave the kid bukhur, may Allah bless him, but that's what he had. But how often are we thinking like that? As a parent, I've watched my kids come to the masjid and the ammus and the khaltus and the uncles and the aunties give them a few dollars, what it means to them. My kids don't spend money, but they just got a gift. Or in other gatherings I've seen giving candy out at the end. What it makes kids, wallahi, there are some gatherings my kids don't care anything about, but they want to go and they know as a gathering at the end, I'm going to get candy. I'm going to be patient for an hour so I can get candy. What's going on? Listen, I'm patient for that candy. For how much do we praise kids for good character? And how are we teaching and connecting the praise with those things? I told you guys last week that I had to punish my daughter because she was going crazy. She had horrible adab. She was crying because she couldn't pick out her clothes. and she's like shut down. So she stayed home. She stayed in her room all day. This week, mashallah, miraculously, her adab's on 1,000. She woke up the next morning laughing and smiling. So we joked and we praised her. We said, mashallah, Asiya got her smile back. It came back. So that she know, and I thanked her. Thank you for your good behavior. Thank you for doing these things. I don't want her to know Baba is only the mean disciplinarian, which probably I am. But I want her to also know that I appreciate the good stuff. She messed up again this week. It's okay. Yeah, it's expected. Alhamdulillah. The next day my wife saw it. I was like, see, you was mad at me. Look. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Bless our children. Al-Muhim, and I'm not going to go into this extensively. I think that was the point that I really wanted to hit on. Not only with children, but even ourselves. When we're creating new behaviors and we're finding new habits, it's okay to like be grateful for the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to overcome those bad habits. And something that I remind myself and I remind people, if you ever think that you're so bad, think back to like a year or two ago when you weren't coming to halaqat as much. Think back to like 5-10 years ago when you were doing other things, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. We get to see our progression from time to time, but what's important is that we are progressing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us a community that's often reflecting and working on ourselves and striving to improve. The first step is that we have to be aware that there's something wrong. Let's say that, mashallah, we started off with talking this, but let's say that you feel like there's nothing wrong. I promise you there is. Malish. So we should always be with the mindset that there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. I don't care how many thobes you wear or how many abayas you have. I don't care about how much Quran you memorize or how many halaqat you go to or how many sheikhs you know or whatever the case. There's always room for improvement for you and for the sheikh. So we have to be mindful of this. And then after that, we have to try to have presence of heart and of mind so that we can recognize what we're doing in the moment, but also afterwards. How was I? How to interact, etc. Now, it should not be to the point of anxiety inducing. We're like, now we're spiraling, like, oh my God. That's not healthy. And if you are prone to anxiety, perhaps you should scale it back a little bit. What is important is that we're trying to work on and improving. Jazakumullah khair. Beautiful reflection. Yeah.
I'd say
having good thoughts of other people and making excuses constantly. You know, subhanAllah, you'll find that people, not always, but people that have bad thoughts about themselves have a very hard time making excuses for others. And I'm not saying we excuse poor behavior, but we have to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. And if we can believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and the fact that we have the potential for change, that we have the potential for greatness, to really be people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, these ayat that we recited, these verses that we mentioned, then perhaps we will start to have husnul dhan of others. Also, if you know your reality, if you're just authentic, and I hate that term, but you're genuine with yourself, you know what your reality is, then you'll assume that everyone else is better than you anyways. So there's judging actions and judging someone's state with Allah. If you see sister so-and-so on the corner with a 40-ounce drinking alcohol, it's like, that person has a problem. May Allah make it easy for all of us, right? There are people in our community drink. But if you happen to see them on the corner with a bottle of alcohol, there's a problem. Now, I'm not saying they're a horrible person. I'm not saying they're, Allah doesn't love them. I'm not saying there's no salvation for them. I'm not saying anything like that between them and God. But the reality is, perhaps I wouldn't want my son to marry that sister. Like, that's not a judgment. I just don't think that, I want to hang out with said person. And so there's a different way to go about it. We're just recognizing, first of all, we don't need to judge unless we're about to do business, we're about to marry. Those are really it. And so outside of that, it's not our business. Now, if you want to get involved to help or intervene, jazakumullah khair. But yeah. And even the external, we have to be careful with. You may think that someone is pious because they wear a thobe or they have a beard or whatever, and it could be horrible. Wallahi alim, there's a brother when I lived in Mecca who went into business with one of the Imams of the Haram. He stole like $500,000 from him. Humans. I'm sure there's an excuse. The Imam al-Haram believes he missed contract, blah, 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 counted, it wasn't him. So fine, whatever. That British brother did not feel that way. And so, don't, no politics, please. People steal in all countries. It's malish. No judgment. La hawla. A beautiful question. Why is it that some people are more kind, or more generous, or they have better behavior outside the house than they do with people inside the house? May Allah bless you for your good question. I thought you were going to throw your mom under the bus. Like these parents. How many of us remember when we were kids and they're like scolding us? They go, "Assalamu alaikum." I was like, wait, what? Like, how you do that? It's only natural that we take those that are close to us for granted. And we just allow, it's excusable behavior. We think this is okay. And we can conduct ourselves that way. But the reality is that the Prophet ﷺ, how do we know who he was in private? The most from his wives and from his family. And the one who testified to him having a good character was his wife Aisha. Kana khuluqul Quran, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it shouldn't be that we take people from granted. It should be that we're striving to rectify ourselves in public and in private. And what are steps that we can take is we just have to recognize it. You want to take a really smack in the face way, go ask people how you deal with them. What do you think of my behavior? What are things that I can improve on? Genuinely, what can I improve on? And then you'll start to recognize what are your deficiencies, what you can improve on. And that goes back to what Abdul-Malik was mentioning before. We have to be open to criticism. And if we're not having these open, honest conversations, then we won't be able to recognize them. Allah. You know, in mindfulness meditation, they talk about non-judgmental, being non-judgmental of yourself. So they'll say when your attention starts to drift, gently bring it back. Don't be aggressive with yourself. Like, listen, if you use the app Headspace, they'll say, and gently bring it back. Why? Because you have to build up habits. You have to build up, it's, again, like a muscle. Granted, I think we over-focus on what attention is, and we worry about it so much, because if you're passionate about something, or you're interested in something, you will have all the attention in the world. The problem is the things that you're finding yourself not attentive to, you probably aren't passionate about. But even if you're having problems, speak to your medical professional. Okay. But outside in normative ways is being disciplined. A lot of attention is actually being disciplined, putting in the work and working to do those things. Wallah. Yeah.
What about being strong?
What about being strong?
To improve our character, being strong and not being a doormat.
Oh. What about being strong? You know, strength comes in many different ways, and it's incredibly important. When I think of strength, I think of resilience, I think of fortitude, I think of being principled. And this is important for both men and women to have principles that we're going to stand upon. And when you have principles, then you don't really care what or who the person is, because now you're doing, this removes all of the person problems from it. I tell both men and women, but definitely men, to be principled. Because a lot of times in early marriages or relationships, or, well, I don't know, when am I nice and when am I not? I'll never forget, my wife was pregnant with our son, and I was like lost, because we were in Mecca, we were poor. She kept asking for a Pizza Hut. Like, pizza was super expensive. It was like $50, and I was a poor, so like, it was ridiculous. It was like $30 for a pizza, but it's $1, so for me it was like 200 yeah, something ridiculous. And I didn't have it. So I asked one of the older brothers there. He said, listen, do for your wife whatever you can. And if you can't, you tell her you can't. And that stuck with me for a really long time. What he was saying is be principled. If you have the money, stop being cheap. She's pregnant, she's craving. Give her what she wants. But if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. Don't hurt yourself. And I think that we just need to be principled people. Now, and that extends to every domain of our lives. If we're principled, then we know these are things I'm not willing to do. These are things I'm not willing to do. Then we can put hierarchies to those priorities. I know that within my principles, these are the priorities for me in my life. So like, for example, I'm not going to do haram. Inshallah, it's a priority for all of us. But then also, I'm going to make sure I pray on time. So now, how I set up my day needs to be based on that. And just because my friend's going to go do something, I'm not going to be a doormat. I'm going to be principled and strong with my conviction in the things that I'm going to do. The same thing goes if someone is being abusive, someone is being taking advantage of us. It requires that we're principled. I'm not doing this because I don't like you. I'm doing this because you're now taking advantage of me. And I'm going to set these boundaries. And we all just have to have those things. It's incredibly important. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow all of us to have good character. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us of our sins, our shortcomings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be principled, strong brothers and sisters, and stand up for what is true and respond and correct what is wrong. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a community with love and service that truly loves each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, struggling and striving against and with ourselves to be good people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make things easy for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Sudan, in India, in Kashmir, wherever Muslims may be struggling in this world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy for them and never let our hearts go cold when we see it. وَأَقُولُ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ وَلَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَلَا تُذْنِبُوا